Yeah. Well, I'm going to start now as I welcome everybody on YouTube. Welcome, everyone. We hope you had a nice holiday last night, a nice non-Jewish holiday. I don't believe in Halloween, as I tell people. I just decided to dress up as Luigi, and my son is Mario, my daughter's Princess Peach, for no reason at all last night. It had nothing to do with Halloween. It was just, we just happened to walk around gathering candy, and of course we're going to give out candy to people. That would be rude. So, but we don't believe in Halloween, just in case you're wondering.
The Christian holiday.
It's right. It's a pagan Christian holiday that I do not believe in at all. And I didn't believe in it when I dressed up on Saturday night either.
Right, when he dressed up.
Rabbi,
perfectly-
look at it this way. You're practicing for Purim.
That's right. To be perfectly honest, my wife and I dress up in costumes so often anyway for all these events. It's not a big deal to wear a costume like for any holiday.
You must have a closet just for all your costumes.
We have two giant not cabinets, trunks, and then we have at the back both closets and my son's closet.
You could open up your own costume shop.
Well, they're not those nice. The costume shop closed in town. They had an awesome one, and they closed, and I forgot to go in and get a whole bunch of stuff that I wish I had. Well, welcome everybody. We'll talk about costumes later. We know. I'm going to start now as I welcome everybody. The news, of course, is still difficult in Israel, especially after yesterday's news. But we continue to pray, and that was a very big tragedy. But it's hard to know what they're hiding out in the middle of these refugee camps. Karen.
I just want, there was a little bit of bright light this morning. They announced they've started letting people through the Rafah gate.
Right, that's great.
Not Americans yet, but I think they said starting tomorrow, the Americans will be able to get through. So, but they've a number of people have gotten through already with international passports, obviously.
Yeah, and I think we all know.
So that's something.
Yeah, Israel is going to take out Hamas. They don't care what anybody says at this point. So they need to do what they need to do, and Hamas knows, and they want as much carnage as possible on the news. They want the world to hate Israel, so that's their goal. So
How do you get rid of that mindset, though? That mindset is going to be there forever. I'm so discouraged.
So that mindset is with them, but you have to understand, in other parts of the Muslim world, they can't, Egypt and Jordan have made peace with Israel. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates are starting to have inroads. There's always going to be people hate. There's always going to be terrorists. There's always going to be radicals. So those people you'll never convince. Well, maybe some. But
it's about teaching the children to make generational change. Right. Just like we're more accepting of races because we were raised in a generation that was more accepting. If we can pass that down to our children, then with each generation, it'll get better.
I agree. And I think
or worse.
Right. Yeah, it may get worse too. It may get worse in some ways and then hopefully get better. There's been some really good progress at times and some difficult, but look around, Israel is such in the news all the time, but there are a lot of worse issues in the world by far than Israel. Iran, North Korea, big issues in Russia and Ukraine. The funniest thing is when you see countries like Russia and Iran and Syria denounce Israel.
Right. Hypocrites.
Yeah, it's really funny on a sad way. So we're going to talk though about, we decided we can always talk about Israel as well to go over anything. A reminder that the food festival is coming up. But what we're doing today is we're going to talk about personalities in the Bible, is what we talked about, and maybe talk about some well-known and some less well-known personalities. And then maybe next week, if people want to bring up their own favorite people to talk about. But I thought I'd start off today with talking about some of the essential but less known people in the Bible that have made a major impact, and then maybe go to some of the prophetic and other books. So whenever I talk about other people in the Bible, I often like to talk about Shiphrah and Puah. Those are who I like to talk about often first because there's a couple people or couples who have a big impact, and we know so little about them because there's just not that much. And Shiphrah and Puah are like the two of the earliest ones because they come at the beginning of the book of Exodus, and of course, they're the midwives. So they're the midwives who, when Pharaoh gives the edict that all male Jewish-born children or Hebrew-born children are to be killed, they're the ones who refuse and, of course, deliver babies at probably their own, to their own detriment in many ways. It's kind of civil disobedience, maybe, as a bit. So what is unique is, again, there are very few people in the Bible who have nothing negative said about them. The greater you are, usually the more negative stuff. The Bible says probably more negative stuff about the Jewish people than the non-Jews in many respects, because it's about how to live better. Obviously, Pharaoh's the enemy. So Shiphrah and Puah are interesting because they're Jewish midwives. However, what do we not know about them? We don't even know if they're Jewish. Because you say Jewish midwives or Hebrew midwives, does that mean they're midwives to the Hebrews? Or does that mean they're actually Hebrews themselves? So there's still a debate as to whether they were Egyptian women or whether they were Hebrews. And either way is pretty impressive. If they're Hebrew and they're going against Pharaoh, they're supporting their own people. But it's even more impressive if they're not Hebrews. Because think about this, you have two women who are delivering babies. Who has told them not to do it? Who has told them to let these babies die or kill the babies?
Pharaoh.
And who is Pharaoh in their culture? In their culture, he is not just a king, he is a God king. He is literally above human beings. And so what you have is these two women, and we assume they're women, but they probably were, who are standing up openly to them, to Pharaoh. And this is incredible to see this kind of, and when, they give the edict, when you deliver the Hebrew women, you see them birth stool. If it's a son, you're to kill him. If it's a daughter, she shall live. Obviously, this is, by the way, still the strangest edict, because if you want to decrease the population, you don't kill the men, you kill the women. I think Pharaoh probably should have realized this, but it's kind of strange because women have the babies, in case you guys probably all knew that, but in case you didn't. So when he finds out they haven't been doing this, he says, how is it that you are not doing my job, whatever I told you? What do they say? They say the Hebrew women are unlike the Egyptian women, for they are experts. Before the midwife comes to them, they have given birth, basically. Basically, they're saying, we can't get there fast enough. And so this obviously is a lie, and Pharaoh probably knows it's a lie, but the fact that they're saying this and trying to excuse their disobedience to Pharaoh with these stories, we don't know what happens to them. We don't know if they were killed. We don't know if they got away with it. We don't know if they're well connected so they can do these things, which, we know people have connections, so Pharaoh may not want to do this. But it's really, they're kind of the best example of what we as human beings are supposed to be, especially if they're Egyptian. It's understandable if you're helping your own people, but if you're helping somebody else, that's even more so, especially if it's against the wishes of the leadership, in this case, a God king. So there's so many examples, and of course, the most obvious is the Holocaust, the righteous Gentiles. Saving people. You look at Hotel Rwanda, you look at, people who are saving others who are being persecuted or standing up for them. In some cases, we just stand up for them. In other cases, we risk our lives for them. And that's what we're seeing here, because most likely they're risking their lives. But again, we don't know what happened to them. They could have been killed. They could have been perfectly fine. They could have been fired. But it's really, and whenever I talk about it, I remember the first time when I gave us, one of the times I gave a sermon about them, or just happened to be the week we're reading it, was the week that Miep Geis died. Miep Geis was the German woman who protected the Franks. Flossie, did you want to say something?
Dutch woman. She was Dutch.
Oh, sorry. What did I say? French woman? She was Dutch. Yeah.
You said German, but she was Dutch.
German, yeah,
Right.
she's Dutch, right.
These two women, Shifra and Pula, they appear and then they're never heard
Right.
from.
I think they're referenced one at a time, but yeah, appear the first chapter of Exodus. And they're there for maybe 2 paragraphs, and that's it. So we don't know what happened to them, but obviously, I mean, it's pretty. As the Or Chaim, who's a very famous sage from the 17th century, said, every baby that was born and remained alive was credited to Shifra and Pua. We as Jews are here today because of these 2 extraordinary women. That is why God rewards them by establishing households for them. So he basically said God probably rewarded them. And the Bible is a great book. And this is another reason it's so unusual, because the other books from the time period, or even close to it, venerate their own characters. You read the Iliad, which is a fabulous book. They talk about a character and then they spend 2 pages talking about how amazing that character is. And on the other side is the bad guys. And the bad guys are evil. Where in the Bible, we see people venerated who are not Hebrews or Jewish often. And many times they are venerated as being better than the Jews or the Hebrews, or depending on the Israelites, whatever they're called. And that is another reason the book is so impressive. We're venerating Pua and Shifra, who probably were Egyptian. And if they're not, they're made to seem probably more likely as from the text. So we're venerating these 2 women, who are women, first of all, and who are standing up to Pharaoh, and probably not Jewish. And that's a pretty impressive thing, because there's nothing negative said about them. And they're venerated throughout time by sages of all walks. So it's, again, really impressive to see what these women did, and the fact that, civil disobedience, which we've seen, can be really impressive. And they are, those 2 of the people who are most venerated for what they did.
Rabbi?
Larry?
Did they have a connection at all to Moses?
Not that we know of. Were they the ones that delivered him? Probably. But it doesn't say that in the text. So they are in chapter 1. Moses is delivered in chapter 2.
Yeah, but then the story even gets more complicated, because it's if you're looking for civil disobedience, the Pharaoh's daughter.
Exactly, and that would be another person we're going to go to, Pharaoh's daughter, who does the same thing. Now, I don't know, from my perspective, it's not as impressive as Shifra and Pua, because we don't know if these women were connected or not, because it is Pharaoh's daughter. So there's probably special dispensation for Pharaoh's daughter to get away with things that other people won't. But it's still impressive that she's going against her own father's edict. Now, the other thing we don't know if the rest of Egypt or even her household knew that this baby was an Israelite. Some believe it was hidden, and some believe it was out in the open and maybe hidden from just Moses.
We know how old Moses was when he was rescued, supposedly, in the river by the, how many days?
I don't think exactly, but very young, just very young infants.
The reason I'm asking is what about circumcision? We never hear about that, whether or not Moses was circumcised.
He was not circumcised because later he's required to do it to him and his sons.
Oh, it was later? The Bible says that?
I believe so. Yeah, I know his sons were circumcised later. I believe he may have been as well. I can double check that. Or maybe I gotta check. I don't remember the Egyptian circumcision. Remember, circumcision, although is a law for Jews, it is not. It wasn't uncommon in different traditions. It is very. I can't remember if the Egyptians did. I don't think they did, but certainly in African traditions, it is done usually a little bit later in life. And a lot of times, though, when you're circumcised in these other cultures, it's not at birth, or it's later on in life.
Right, right.
I think we were one of the few that did it that early.
One of the gaps in the story, obviously, is Pharaoh prince, the princess brings this new kid into the household, and he's immediately accepted, as a prince, almost in princely status.
Yeah, and again, we don't know. I'm trying to remember Moses. I know he circumcised his son. I can't remember if Moses was circumcised. I'm sure he was.
I just
I
Googled.
don't think it actually says he was circumcised. But anyway, if you're Pharaoh's daughter, I mean, that's probably why he was excused. There are different thoughts that he grew up in the household, but he was not considered. It didn't seem like he was considered to be in line to be Pharaoh. So would be like an adopted brother. So you're right. It's not, the story's not complete. We don't know we don't know who knew he was Israelite. We don't know, obviously Pharaoh's daughter knew, but we don't know all these other things as who knew. And it's a good question. It's a debate that still is to today. The famous story from the Ten Commandments is that he found out, somebody told him, he kills the slave master, but that's not true. He may have known from the very beginning. Karen, do you want?
No, I just Googled Egyptian circumcision, and just a real quick, it said going back to about 6,000 BC, they found this from art, mummies and so forth. They believe it was done at puberty, which would be very common in Africa.
Yeah. So
not at birth.
Well, I think what they do with Moses is there was some phrase like he is good, and sometimes that is taken as circumcision, but it doesn't say he was circumcised at birth, I don't think, but he could have been done later. You're right. He is ordered to circumcise his sons. So by that, you assume it means he is already circumcised himself. That's a good question, though. So Shifra and Puah, 2 thumbs up. Pharaoh's daughter, again, we don't know the name of Pharaoh. And so 2 thumbs up. Now for another non-Jewish personality, probably the most venerated in many respects. You have others like Melchizedek, which was an earlier one, which we could talk about, but is probably Jethro. Jethro is, of course, Moses' father-in-law, also known as Ruel. So he is, of course, a priest of Midian. So again, not only is the Bible lionizing a non-Jewish person, they're lionizing a priest who's not Jewish, overtly not Jewish. He's a priest of Midian. That's all, Midian is kind of like probably a conglomeration of different groups. And so he is lionized in many ways. One, of course, he takes Moses in, lets him marry his daughter, even though he's obviously not a Midianite, he's an Egyptian. Moses is treated very well and adores his father-in-law. He enlarges, but we also see that it's an echo to the story of Jacob, whose cousin is his boss, Laban, and Jacob grows his flocks, but Laban continually cheats his daughters, or basically his son-in-law. He tricks him by having him marry a different wife. He forces him to work basically 21 years, and then he has to basically go out in the night. Whereas Jethro is the opposite of Laban. He is not related. He treats Moses like a prince. And when Moses leaves to go to Egypt, he's supportive. And then when Moses is leading the people out of Egypt, Jethro comes to him and is very worried about him. And what does he see? He sees that Moses is judging everybody. So everybody who has an issue comes to Moses, no matter how big or small. Obviously, it's a lot of people. It takes up his whole day. And Jethro's the one who says, you can't use yourself up. You got to really, train people to do this for you so you don't have to do all of these things. And he's the one who convinces Moses to really learn to delegate.
Mhm.
So, and he is venerated for this. He says, the thing you're doing is not right. You will surely wear yourself out. And these people as well, for the task is too heavy for you. You can not do it alone. So, and he is always considered a mensch, etc. And let me show you a photo of it. So you'll see photos of him. Let's see if I can find a photo. There you go.
Rabbi,
Photos of Jethro. 1 second. There you go. You see the photos?
Oh,
Beverly Hills.
I was just gonna say.
Beverly Hillbillies.
There's
Is that-
Jethro. Yeah. There's Jethro.
Oh, from the Ten Commandments movie.
All right. Here's a trick. Here's a question for you. This Jethro, his father, does anybody know who his father was?
Max Spear.
Very good, Ron. Excellent. 2 thumbs up. His
That was
father
Michael.
was the heavyweight champion of the world.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Yeah, I did know that. I forgot. That was Michael that said it.
Yes.
No, it was Ron.
It was Ron who got it. Ron
Oh,
got it.
pardon me.
I said
Pardon
it.
me.
Listen,
You couldn't hear me.
don't forget me. Here's my hand.
Pardon me, Ron.
You know what, Ron? Next time, write your name on your hand, so when you wave it, we'll know who it is.
I have to do that. But
You gotta
anyway,
write it backwards.
Talking
Not
about
only that,
circumcisions, there's another famous person that very few people know was circumcised, and that's Jesus.
that's right.
Oh. Well, up right near Greenville, you had 2 religious colleges, and when Arlene took a tour, there was this big painting of Jesus labeled "The Circumcision of Jesus."
Why not?
When Arlene asked the docent about that, they refused to discuss it.
Interesting.
Well, Max Baer was at least wore a Jewish star on his trunks and was Jewish. He held the title for a very short time, but he was the heavyweight champion of the world. And his family was at least Jewish. So, Larry.
when did Moses actually realize that he was Jewish?
That is a debate still. That is a very big debate. So some would say somebody told him as he was, again, he could have known from the time he was walking. Because we all know that there's always dispensations for, in India, there's a lot of anti-Muslim beliefs. It's a Hindu, but most of the movie stars are Muslim. In America, there was a lot of, women were not allowed to, in the world, women were not allowed to be scientists, but there's a Marie Curie, So there's exceptions to the rules that are allowed in certain cases for certain things. So he could have known he was Jewish the whole time. We don't know at all. There are different depictions, but most would say he didn't know it till he was at least a young adult. And that's what most people think, but that is not necessarily true. So he's depicted in most of the movies as finding out as he's older, but that is not, again, known.
There's nothing in Exodus that tells you prior to him killing
I don't believe so.
The overseer.
no hint at all as far as him having some kind of a affiliation with the Jewish people.
Well, he eventually found out.
Wasn't his mother the midwife who
His
not
mother
midwife,
was
but
the
not
midwife.
midwife, but she
Yeah,
nursed
so-
him, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she nursed him, but it doesn't say when exactly he knows he's a Hebrew. I mean, I don't think
Right,
so.
right.
Okay, so
we know the part. I mean, the most obvious moment is when he sees the slave master beating the kids. He knows. I mean, that maybe he was told there some sort of connection or something. But again, when it exactly happens,
Maybe he just knew he didn't belong, but he didn't know that he was Jewish, if that makes sense, until later.
right? Yeah, exactly. So, again, there's some various words where he calls, where he says basically he went out to his brothers. There's a famous line. But again, that could be anachronistically looked at. It's somebody writing in the past. Moses went to his brother Hebrews, but it doesn't mean he knew they were his brother Hebrews. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of different views on it. But we do know Jethro is this really impressive character. And there's nothing negative about him in any way, which again, you don't see with the Jewish characters. You know, there's the joke. How do you know somebody's perfect? He or she has a Jewish grandparent. You know, so that's. There's a different joke. I just changed the joke.
I
A little
like
bit
that
for
one. I
Yeah.
like that.
So
Moses had a sister and a brother, right? Now, how did he actually? There's very little about how he actually discovered that they were Aaron and.
No, well, Miriam may have.
well, he may have had a lot of them. And that's a really good question. There is a sister who follows him in the basket. Does not say it's Miriam. Could have been another sister. It's assumed it was Miriam because we only hear about 2 siblings, but he could have had other siblings that were not connected or died. Aaron, we don't find about till much later. He's already an adult. And there's a lot of debate as to whether Aaron actually existed or if he's a character added in later to support. So, or if he really existed, but his descendants put him in later. Because what you see a lot of times is you see God spoke to Moses saying, and you'll say God spoke to Moses and Aaron saying. So, and Aaron is added, or maybe his part is increased. But we don't find about a brother till later.
Well, if Aaron is added, that kind of changes a lot about the smashing of the tablets and
Right.
the calf. It almost makes the story I don't want to say irrelevant, but just basically incorrect.
It does, and again, these are all debates.
Mhm.
So we don't know.
30.
Yeah, again, there's always, that's what it's there for. That's why the answers are not given so obviously, so we can, discuss it. So let's go through another one. We'll go through a couple more. Who I like to talk about also is the Witch of Endor. I don't know if you know about, I love talking about the Witch of Endor. Let's see if we get the Witch of Endor here. Get pictures of the Witch of Endor. Let's see here, put some pictures up. There you go, the Witch of Endor.
You on a bicycle? No.
So the Witch of Endor, of course, is a character that comes much later in the text, but I really like her because, again, we're talking about, individuals have very small parts but play major roles. The Witch of Endor is one of them because at the time of Saul, which we're talking about the book of Samuel, he has outlawed witchcraft. So it's against the rules. So again, if you outlaw witchcraft, that must mean it exists, because you don't outlaw something that doesn't exist. So obviously there's some sort of witchcraft defined by Judaism, anything that is kind of goes against God's, order of things. So he goes to this witch for one reason only, and that is because he wants to talk to Samuel. Samuel's died, and he wants to talk to Samuel. And so he goes to the Witch of Endor, and she's not good or bad. It's just the fact that the king of Israel, a king of Judah, goes to the Witch of Endor shows that at least at that time there was a belief in witchcraft, because you don't outlaw it and then he goes to it. By the way, Endor, of course, is a planet in the Star Wars universe. So Star Wars is in the Bible. That's where the final battle happens in Return of the Jedi, and we defeat the Empire and Emperor himself. You should have probably known that, but if you didn't, now you do. So that's the Endor. So he basically goes to this woman who is obviously renowned or well known. He gives her basically a promissory note that she will not be prosecuted for doing this for him. And he basically has her call Samuel, and Samuel comes out, basically it's some sort of ghostly form. And the first thing he says is basically, "Why are you calling me? I'm dead. Do you not understand this?" And then Saul's like, "Why is everything bad?" He says, "Listen, I already told you you're going to lose the kingship. Deal with it, buddy. And, this one of the reasons you're not a good king is because you're doing something like this." And so it's kind of a little sarcasm there. Samuel's a little harsh, but then again, Samuel's like, "I've done my thing on earth. It's my time to rest. It's now, I've done it all." And so she's not, again, a righteous Gentile, as we would say, but she does add some flavor to the story and shows us also that even though witchcraft is forbidden, she is not depicted as evil in any stretch of the imagination. She's somebody who is practicing something illegal that is considered wrong, but she is not considered evil herself. Whereas in other books, it is more of a black and white type of thing. A witch is a witch and evil. Well, this one is not. This one is actually seen probably in a better light in this moment than the king of the Israelites, Saul himself. And so, although not good or bad, she's not seen as evil. She's seen as just doing her job. So it shows that even though witchcraft is outlawed, it is probably outlawed because it leads people to do things they shouldn't do. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can't be a good person who's doing it. It's, again, now, obviously, if you use witchcraft in terrible ways, divination is not allowed, probably because, live your life and let the dead rest. But she does it, and she is not chastised in any stretch of the imagination. And not only that, she's given complete, what do you call it when you get witness protection? Immunity, complete immunity for her crime. So, and obviously she says, "I'm not doing that anymore," but we all know she probably is. Larry?
Can you give us some examples of what witchcraft was? What was the practice that they were accusing her of, or that?
Well, she was not accused of anything. She could do divination. She could speak to the dead. But there are several levels of witchcraft, and we could go. Why don't we do that next week? We could do witchcraft next week because it's really interesting. I mean, basically, it is very hard to tell sometimes the difference for us because they all seems the same when you're using potions and spells. It's basically not allowed to do things that in a way that does not support God or that goes against God's wishes or that, and witchcraft often had to do with, idolatry. And there were people who were practicing it who weren't probably good people and doing spells to harm and to curse, which was not allowed. So let's talk about that next week. And would you guys be interested in that?
Sure.
Yeah, because that's a much longer topic. Genevieve says, feeling seen, feeling accepted. Yes. So again,
Oh, look at her.
so I think it's important for us to realize the Bible's unique qualities has a lot to do how it treats other people besides Jews. There are bad people like Pharaoh, and there are good non-Jews that are even better than the Jews in many respects, like Shifra Pua and Jethro, who are considered the highest of the high. Even people doing things that are considered illegal, like the Witch of Endor. Yes, she is doing something illegal, but it doesn't mean she is a bad person. It was illegal to drink alcohol during Prohibition. That doesn't mean everybody who's drinking alcohol was bad. Illegal to murder somebody, that's probably bad. So that's more of an ethical issue, whereas witchcraft here is not seen as one, it's seen as leading you to be unethical. So that is the issue. It's not the witchcraft in many respects, it's what witchcraft leads you to do. She's obviously practicing in a way that is not that bad. Or, it's illegal, but it's not, it's illegal to run a stoplight. That is not an ethical issue. It is an ethical issue if you hit somebody, but it's not an ethical issue. It's illegal to do certain things. So, and let's do one more. We'll do some more of the smaller ones. One of my other favorites comes from the book of Jonah. Jonah is a very important character, obviously. The book of Jonah is read on Yom Kippur. And it is essential reading for us to understand Judaism's support of other cultures. And Jonah is probably the best book for this. We have heroes and we have a really interesting dynamic. So Jonah, and I'll remind everyone, the story is asked by God to go to preach to the people of Nineveh. So he can save them. So here we go. Let's look at some pictures of Jonah. There we go. Jonah and the big fish. Some from children's books, some from historical art. So Jonah is told, go to Nineveh, preach to these people, save the city. And what does he do? He runs away. Now, for us, we have to understand the background. He's a prophet. He probably has some intuition of the future. Who is Nineveh? Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrians, who are going to come and destroy the 10 tribes of Israel. And years later, they will destroy Israel and try and destroy Judah. These are the bad guys. So Nineveh is the bad guy. So he does not want to do what?
He doesn't want to save them.
He doesn't want to save his enemies. So eventually he tries to run away. He doesn't. He goes there. He preaches and his enemies repent. And Jonah sulks about it. And so we see in this case that enemies repent. And this is essential for us, especially today, when we chastise everybody for history, for what their ancestors have done, or we don't allow forgiveness. Certain things, obviously, that we may feel are unforgivable, but this is talking about how enemies can become friends even, or how enemies can make amends again, a great example is World War II. Who were our deadliest enemies? Japan and Germany. Today, they are our strongest allies, two of our strongest allies. Larry.
Yeah, but the real problem I have with Jonah is that afterwards, at the end of the story, God finds him crying for a plant, and God admonishes him because Jonah was really out for revenge, it seemed like. I mean, he started out because he wasn't up to the job, and then he doesn't want to fulfill the commandment, that God, or the mission that God had given him. And once he does it, and he does it successfully, you would think he'd say, wow, I did a great job. I'm the Secretary of State going overseas and
peace.
But instead, he's very diminished, isn't he? At the very end of the story,
yeah,
revenge.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that again is showing the prophet in a negative light and the enemy in a positive light. And not only this, there's who's the real hero of the story. The hero of the story is actually a group of people called sailors. Sailors are depicted, they're generally, there's a girl at every port, they're hardened, they are hard drinking, hard living, difficult people. But yet, when the ship is about to sink and they find out it's Jonah's fault and Jonah says, just throw me overboard, they're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to row and try and save you and the whole ship. And so they risk their lives to save Jonah, even though Jonah says, throw me overboard, you'll all be safe. So they, again, it's showing that even sailors, could be even pirates, can act and behave as they're supposed to. And this is all in comparison to a Jewish prophet who is not doing what he's supposed to do.
And Elie Wiesel wrote about Jonah, and one of the things I remember that he wrote was that he basically tries to avoid the mission by going out of what he considers to be God's territory. He really thinks that, apparently thinks that God is ruled only in a very small area, and that if I can get out of this area, then God won't see me. And he doesn't realize that God is a universal God. And Elie Wiesel is very critical, I think, of him in that respect, that, in his attempt to escape with these sailors, to get out of the area so that God won't see me and I don't have to do the mission. So
yeah, and that's an excellent point that I wasn't going to bring up, but it is. In that world of polytheism, gods are very much tied to the land. You are much strong. It's like a home field advantage in basketball. You try going and win a game at Duke or at North Carolina, when you got thousands of fans screaming at you. And that's what the gods are tied to their land in the ancient world. So if you're defeated, your God's defeated and you're carried away, it's easy to take on another God because your God has been killed. So that is one of the reasons we believe that Judaism doesn't really take hold until the Babylonian exile, when we're taken out of Israel, sent to Babylon, and then we remain Jewish, and our Jewish religion becomes stronger away from Israel. That's when it really settles in that we believe in a God that is not tied to the land. That's an excellent point, Larry. Michael.
But, when we talk about our enemies becoming our friends, that this is, very political, but, what does it say about what's going on in Gaza and the human, carnage, which is very upsetting. I mean, but I see a parallel there.
There is a very big parallel here. It's one of the reasons we chose it today, in that it's so often seen that our enemies cannot be our friends ever. But that is not true, and we've proven throughout the ages that we can overcome quite a bit. It may not happen today, and right now, of course, there's a war going on, and Israel's got to do what it's got to do. And unfortunately, it's going to be terrible. But a few years ago, there was very strong hope for peace in the region. And hopefully there will be one day in the future. We saw Israel making inroads to peace with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which nobody ever thought would happen.
Not Saudi Arabia yet.
Nobody ever thought the US would be on speaking terms with Russia. And yet, although we're not right now, there was a period where we're sending assistance to them for years. Same thing with Germany and Japan. In World War II, China was a very strong ally. We're now competing with China. We're not quite enemies. Obviously, thank goodness our economies are tied to each other. But China's not considered one of our staunchest allies today. So again, things can change over time, especially. And it's one of these things that we know we can have issues with our own brothers. I may not speak to my brother for 50 years, but perhaps our children will then get along afterwards. So it does speak of hope. It speaks of how we can be incorrect. And even though I support the war completely in Gaza, I know what they have to do. That doesn't mean everything Israel does in this war is going to be what they're supposed to do. I mean, we know they attacked a refugee camp. We also know that the Hamas were hiding there and wanted them to attack that refugee camp to make them look bad. Israel's in a mood right now where they're going to do what they have to do and they don't care what the world says, because they realize if they don't take out Hamas, what happened recently is just going to happen over and over again. They have no choice. So there's a lot of, it teaches us to look at different sides. A lot of the activists who support the Palestinians and are anti-Israel are probably not very knowledgeable about what really is going on. You know, they say time and again, free Gaza. Well, Gaza's been free of Israel for a long time. And secondly, people in Gaza are never going to be free under that government. They're not literally free. Like when people here say free Gaza, they think of, well, they'll have votes and they'll have their own country. And they don't realize that they've had their own area and they're under a dictatorship. They're not going to be able to vote, and they never will be until the government changes. So it's about how we can change perspectives and work with each other. Today, it's terrible. Everything looks hopeless, but that doesn't mean the future is not going to change. Nobody thought Israel would make peace with Egypt. I can't imagine any of you who were alive in the early 70s, I was obviously very young, would have thought in 1972 or 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, in 5 years, Israel will make peace with Egypt. If you had made that bet, the odds would have been so ridiculous, you would be very wealthy. It would have been 1,000,000 to 1, 10,000,000 to 1, 100. This was a division going back to the Bible. This is going back to the 15th century BCE. In 5 years, they just went into a war, second war in 6 years, and 5 years later, they're making peace. I mean, who would have thunk that? So you never know what's going to happen.
Just a question about Jonah at the end. The end of the book talks about Nineveh as a city of over 100,000 people. That's always, I thought, God, what a huge place that was in those times. What were there cities that large?
There were, I don't know. I mean, again, Nineveh was a big, powerful place. I don't know if it was 100,000. You got to remember, the Bible is not meant to be a history book, because if it is a terrible one. The numbers are off. There's no dates. Things go back and forth. They say things and then say the complete opposite later. You know, when you use a number like that, it's just numbers are used to show things. It's a big, powerful city, period. That's why they're using that number. So yes, it is going to be a powerful city. Now, again, we don't know when the book was written. It could have been probably after the destruction of the North, but it was a very big, powerful city. And it was one of the main cities of a very powerful nation that's going to take over a significant part of the world. But I don't know how many people were there. I mean, we can look that up. I mean, probably there were a few cities that were, I don't know if that big, but big. But that's a lot of people for the ancient world. I mean, and So just remember, plumbing was not what it was today. A lot of people say, I want to go back in time. Well, you know what? Bring some sort of aerosol with you. If you're going to go back in time, aerosol and antibiotics. That's what you need to bring. Flossie.
Rabbi, this really doesn't fit in, but I'm curious. When we're looking at people that stand out, were there any high priests that were exceptional that stand out?
Yes. Again, probably the most. Are you talking about Jewish or non-Jewish?
Whatever you choose.
The most famous one was a guy named Melchizedek. It's in chapter 14 of Genesis. So he is a character, although mentioned one time later, but mentioned as in the past. He is a guy who has 3 verses in Genesis. So Abraham is, Genevieve, did you have a question?
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. It was a
No,
silly
please.
story. So you can finish your story first.
Okay, so Melchizedek, basically Abraham gets involved in a war between 7 nations. Or is it 9? It's 9 nations. Because his nephew Lot had been kidnapped during and so he goes in and helps win the war for the good guys. And he comes back and they're going to give him all this stuff. Here's the rewards and all this. He says, I don't need any of this stuff. Give money and stuff to the people who supported me. And all of a sudden, this guy who's called Melchizedek, he's like a king priest of Salem, which is possibly, you think of Salem, Massachusetts, right? But more possibly you think of Salem, Jerusalem. So some pre-Jerusalem character. And he comes out and he's called the priest of the Most High God. Just as he says, blessed is Abram from the Most High God. So it almost seems like this guy is some sort of monotheist. And he blesses Abraham. He comes out of nowhere. This high priest king seems to be of one God from one of the tribes that may have been the area of Jerusalem, and praises Abraham as a mensch of the God Most High. And so this guy is one of those strange people comes out. Melchizedek, again, kind of means like the righteous king. Even his name means the righteous king. Tzedek, think about Sadiq or Tzedakah. So this guy comes out of nowhere, and quite possibly the entire chapter 14 is added into the Bible later, because they make Abraham a war hero, kind of the idea like, well, we want to have a good army. We need to go back in time and make sure one of our ancestors was a war hero. So we'll make Abraham a war hero. And then at some point, these 3 lines may have been added to this edition. And so it's always debated, was this guy a priest of Jerusalem? So there were already monotheistic people who are not Jewish. He's, put out there as possibly a proto-monotheist to show that Jews support not only Jews who are monotheists, but other religions. He's very well thought of in Christianity. Genevieve, I'll go to you because we're about to finish. We'll make sure you get to. All right, so Genevieve, anything, Genevieve? Okay, I think I lost her.
Sorry,
there you are. Did you want to add anything before we concluded?
Oh, that just my silly story. You were talking about needing aerosol, and it made me think of this memory I had as a child before my mom's car accident. I would see monsters like in the darkness, sitting at night, because I don't know why I was allowed to watch horror films before the age of 5, like Poltergeist and stuff. But anyway, so I would have nightmares as a child, and my mom would come in with the aerosol Lysol and pretend it was monster spray.
Right.
So the aerosol was important to me as a child because it took away the monsters.
Well, I think it still probably does. When I was talking about because probably the ancient world smelled and everything would, was probably, the water would have been. So, but yes, but I agree. I would love to. If I had to attack a monster, I would use aerosol still.
Yeah.
So you could use that for your kids too. If they ever see monsters, just come in with the Lysol and tell them it's monster spray.
Right. All right. We'll conclude with Larry.
Rabbi, two things. One is maybe in the future we could talk also about who's number two in Judaism. We had
Oh,
started.
is that what we were? That's what we were going to do. Oh, yeah, we can do that next week.
So and I could understand. People said Abraham, and then you had mentioned Samuel because he's got 2 books named after him, and maybe we're not all familiar with all his contributions of why he would be.
All right, so let's do that next week because I think we're supposed to do it this week. I got confused now, so I forgot. Okay, so we'll do that, and then we'll do the week after witchcraft in Judaism. So next week we're going to look at the top 10 Jews of all time, or who can make the list.
All right. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I know you're going to be doing a Shalom Club presentation soon, right?
Yes.
In Sun City. Is it next Wednesday or?
It is. Let me open up my calendar. I think I think it is next Wednesday. It's either next Wednesday or the Wednesday after. It is a different type of presentation because they told me just to do stand up, but I may talk about Israel as well. So
interesting that you're going to do the comedy because I don't know if anybody saw on TV Rabbi Potterhertz. I may say his name wrong. He's a New York rabbi, and he was doing a bar mitzvah for a young child, for 13-year-old in a synagogue, and he happened to be reading, I guess, the story of Isaac. And when Isaac, I never realized the affiliation of Isaac and laughter, and he kind of tied the two together, and he said that even during these darkest times, we should not take away our laughter, and we should still. That's one of the most precious things that we have is to, take a respite from some of these things.
Amen.
Sermon, and you probably can get it on YouTube.
Yeah, that's a great. And again, I will be there a week from Wednesday. You're right, a week from today. And it's 7:00. Come for hopefully laugh at my jokes. It's a little different because, as I'll say there, I'm not going to be teaching anything. There will be nothing gained from this. You will not come out of here a better person, probably worse. So, and then just to also another reminder that a week from Sunday is the food festival, 11 to 3. Come to volunteer, come to eat. And then the week after, 2 weeks from Saturday, will be Cantor Rachel Colbrenner's installation that Saturday morning. So if you want to come, you can RSVP. We just want to it's not done cost anything, get numbers for lunch.
Is her sister going to do the installation?
Her sister's going to do the installation. So we're excited about that. So fantastic, everybody. Rockin' Shabbat this Friday night. A lot of stuff coming up. But food festival, don't forget. All right, everyone be safe. And if anything you need, let me know. And we will see you next week, everybody, on the Wednesday morning class that shall not be named.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys. I'll put you on gallery view.
Weekend. Stay well.
I know this is a Christian thing, but what do you think about Wednesday Warriors?
Wednesday Warriors. I think it should just be Wednesday Adams.
Okay, there you go. I like
We'll
that
have a
one too.
different name for every week.
All right. Bye.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.